When we think of supply shortages, we might be thinking about toilet paper in 2020 or maybe computer chips right now. But actually, supply shortages happen all the time. And while they might not make the news, they can still have an outsized impact on our everyday lives. A shortage of aluminum, for instance, can mean that it's harder to find your favorite soda in a can. Or a shortage of cardboard means higher prices for everything from cereal to new cars. So what causes these widespread supply shortages? The answer, as it so often is complicated. So here are just a few reasons why stuff we need and want is sometimes hard to get our hands on. Take the Suez Canal, the busy waterway that connects the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea, that is part of the reason why you're having trouble buying a new car and part of the reason why you're paying so much for gas. But more on that later. In 2015, a company called Mylan bought another company called Abbott. And as part of the deal, Mylan took over responsibility for making and distributing EpiPen. So much so that your local grocery store sells out of its entire stock of cheese every single day. With demand for restaurant food suddenly gone, restaurants tried to pivot by selling groceries instead. But since those restaurants weren't prepared to sell groceries, many of them sold out of staples like milk and eggs. Those shortages led to panic buying, which meant that more and more grocery store shelves were left bare. In 2010, the world experienced a shortage of cobalt, which is used to make jet engine parts, tools, and rechargeable batteries. The problem was that the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which produces 70% of the world's cobalt, experienced unusually heavy rains. Those rains destroyed vast amounts of the mineral that miners had already extracted, leading to a major shortage. The solution wasn't to order more of those items. It is obviously far worse when a community doesn't have access to clean drinking water or to the medicine it needs to stay healthy. So governments often step in to prevent or mitigate shortages of essential goods. Those shortages highlighted a vulnerability in the grid and inspired sweeping changes to improve the state's ability to provide for its residents in the future. Instead, grocery stores needed to limit how many people could shop at once, institute social distancing measures, and require employees to wear masks. As a result, many Japanese households were without air conditioning during a heat wave, which resulted in a run on fans. The government intervened in order to prevent a shortage of fans by granting subsidies to companies that produce them. And while it can be frustrating to pay high prices or to miss out on the products we want, it is important to remember that many of these shortages are temporary and that the companies involved are working hard to get things back to normal. Unless, of course, you're one of the companies responsible for the whole toilet paper shortage of 2020. You guys kind of sucked. All of which took time to put into place. If that pattern continues, it's a pretty safe bet that the grocery store will start ordering more cheese from its supplier. But if instead of selling out of cheese every day, the store started selling out of milk, it probably wouldn't make sense to order more cheese. You know that the winter is going to be your peak season because that is when it snows and people are eager to hit the slopes. So you hire more workers and rent out more cabins than usual to accommodate the increased number of visitors. But then an unexpected heat wave hits and no one feels like skiing in the snow. Now you've overstaffed and have more cabins rented out than you can fill. So at the beginning of your next ski season, you cut back. Unfortunately, a few weeks after you let go of all those seasonal workers, business picks up. You're busy and you're turning people away. In this scenario, you could argue that the ski resort was experiencing a supply shortage because it couldn't accommodate all of the people who wanted to ski. After all, there's no point in ordering more of something when people aren't buying it. So companies use data about sales and consumer trends to inform decisions about how much of each item they should order. And if consumers change what they're buying or how much of it they're buying, it can take time for companies to realize what's happening and adjust accordingly. But it turned out that Mylan didn't have the resources to make as many EpiPens as Abbott had made. And when Mylan couldn't make enough EpiPens, prices skyrocketed and the drug became hard to find. Like when a product becomes very popular, demand for it goes up and prices rise. So if you were hoping to buy the newest iPhone on launch day, you might find yourself waiting hours in line. Demand is also affected by the season. In fact, there's even a word for it, peak season, which refers to the time of year when demand for a particular product is at its highest. It is one of the busiest trade routes in the world, and it has been since it opened in 1869. In March of 2021, a container ship got stuck sideways across the canal, blocking traffic and delaying shipments. And since roughly 12% of the world's trade passes through the Suez Canal, the resulting backlog caused major shortages in several industries. One of those industries was car manufacturing. You see, one of the main components of a car is a semiconductor, which is a small chip that helps control functions throughout the vehicle. And since those chips are manufactured in Asia, they pass through the Suez Canal on their way to car factories in Europe and North America. But when the canal was blocked, those shipments were delayed, and that meant that factories couldn't build as many cars as they would have liked. Well, it's possible to have a similar reaction to the global economy. When everything seems to be going well, it can be tempting to think that things will just keep getting better. They're usually put in place to protect domestic industries from foreign competition. Tariffs are controversial because they can increase the price of imported products, making them less competitive, and also because they often lead to retaliatory tariffs from other countries. But whether or not you agree with them politically, tariffs are a fact of life for many industries. Since tariffs raise the cost of imported goods, manufacturers who use those goods in their products have to raise the cost of their own products. And if those costs become too high, a company might decide to stop selling its products altogether. This can create shortages, especially if the company is a major player in its industry. For instance, factories shut down early on in the pandemic. And even though some of those facilities have reopened, they aren't operating at full capacity due to safety guidelines. There are also fewer truck drivers than before. So manufacturers often have to wait longer for the supplies they need. So if you wanted to buy a product that was made with aluminum during the pandemic, you might have had trouble finding it because of production slowdowns. At every step of the manufacturing process, from factory floors to warehouses to shipping lanes, the pandemic disrupted the flow of goods and services around the world. And that means that there are some things we couldn't get our hands on no matter how much money we had to spend. But like that song, it's best to prepare for the inevitable crash. You know when your favorite band plays a song at the end of the set that you've been dying to hear, but you can't end because the sound quality is terrible? Imagine that demand for garden hoses spikes because everyone is spending a lot of time at home and working on their green thumbs. If the companies that produce garden hoses had expected that spike, they would have hired more workers, bought more raw materials, and spent more money on advertising. But since no one could reasonably predict such a sudden interest in gardening, those companies were caught off guard. They may not have enough employees or supplies on hand to meet this new demand. And if they don't quickly figure out a way to ramp up production, customers won't be able to buy as many hoses as they want. In other words, businesses try to anticipate demand and produce accordingly. But sometimes they get it wrong, and when they do, the result can be shortages or other problems down the line. When things inevitably go wrong, the tendency is to overreact. In the case of the pandemic, economists were already expecting some disruptions in the supply chain. Of course, pandemics aren't the only cause of supply shortages. And yes, semiconductors are in short supply right now. Now let's talk about tariffs, which are taxes placed on goods that are produced outside of a country. One example of this is EpiPen, which is a device that provides emergency treatment for severe allergic reactions. There are also times when a shortage is actually a good thing. Let's say everyone in your town loves cheese. For example, when stay-at-home orders were issued in the US, many restaurants closed. Sometimes supply shortages are just a result of basic supply and demand economics. Let's say that you run a ski resort. And sometimes supply shortages are just a result of plain old bad luck. But not all shortages are created equal. While it can be annoying to go to the store and not find the ingredients you need to make your famous lasagna, for example, in 2011, Japan was hit by a tsunami that damaged several nuclear reactors and caused a major power outage. Unfortunately, sometimes nothing can be done to prevent a supply shortage, like when the Texas power grid went down in February of 2021, causing widespread shortages of food, water, and medical care. So yeah, supply shortages happen all the time, both big and small. Thanks for watching this episode of SCI Show, and thanks especially to our supporters for helping us continue exploring everything from the mundane to the marvelous to the mind-boggling.